The following program is a presentation of the Civil War Broadcasting Network, available on the free YouTube channel Dr. E.C. Fields, on the Facebook page Kurt Fields as General Ulysses S. Grant, and on various social other media. Permission to copy and distribute is given and indeed encouraged. Remember, you are the future of our past. And now, part two of From Fort Donelson to Shiloh. When last we talked and I reflected about Shiloh, I had stopped with my brief conversation with General Sherman when he had really come to advocate that we retreat across the Tennessee River and put the river between us and the rebels at the end of that first day of the battle at Shiloh. He had really come to encourage me to do that, but when I had told him, lick 'em tomorrow, though, he thought better of that suggestion and said he should get back to his command. And I told him, best you do. We would move at first light because the army that moves first will carry the day. The next morning, after an all-night bombardment from the gunboats Lexington and Tyler, every 15 minutes or so, they were launching 8-inch shells into the Confederate camps to keep them awake. At first light, I had about 15,000 more troops from Buell's Army of the Ohio, and we had the Lew Wallace soldiers, more than 5,000. All of Bull Nelson's troops were now across the river. So I had about 45,000 soldiers to begin the day. And my early reports had been that the rebels had as many as 100,000 soldiers. It turns out they had about 44,000 at the most. But I've gotten almost as many men overnight as I had to start with the day before, and Beauregard, now in command, has not gotten any reinforcements. And a telling issue for me was that despite the ferocity of the rebel attacks all day on the 6th, they did not hit us first. They were not in an attack mode. We hit them at first light. Orders were to send out a heavy skirmish line and move into them. When contact was made, the entire line, all along the line, would hit, and there would be no reserves. So that's how we went into the battle. It was a pitched fight all day. They fought valiantly, not quite as ferociously as they did on the 6th. They had an orderly withdrawal, and by the middle of the afternoon, we had pushed back to where the battle had begun the day before. We had retaken all the area that we had lost. And then about mid-afternoon, I understand that one of Beauregard's closest staff officers turned to General Beauregard and said to him, "General, do you not see our army much as a sugar cube that someone's dropped a droplet of water on it? It is holding its shape, but it is melting away. Do you not think it's time to retreat?" Beauregard reluctantly, I think, agreed and said, "Yes, call retreat." And they fell back. I had sent then Sherman to probe to be sure that it wasn't a regrouping for a counterattack. And he moved out with troops. And at a place called Fallen Timbers, he met the rear guard of Beauregard's army, which was Nathan Bedford Forrest, Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Bedford Forrest. and a pretty stiff fight ensued at Fallen Timbers. And the story I have heard is that Forrest leveled his pistol at Sherman and fired, but it fell on an empty chamber. I don't know about the veracity of that statement, but it is a good story that's getting a lot of repeating. But I think it noteworthy that Sherman and Forrest were actually on the same field at the same time. He came back and reported that they were indeed falling back. I did not pursue them. Heavy rain had started to fall again, and our troops were exhausted. And even though I was in command of all the troops on the field, I had only recently gotten the command over General Buell's troops, and I was reluctant to order them to participate in a pursuit. I had been roundly criticized because I did not pursue Beauregard, but our troops had just been in, for many of them, the first fight they'd ever been in. For all of them, it had been a savage 2 days, and they were past exhausted. So I think General Sherman articulated it very well when he said, we had 2 days of the Southerners' hospitality, and if they were willing to let us alone, we were quite willing to leave them alone. And we began to lick our wounds, bury the dead, and regroup. Now, General Halleck arrived on the field on April the 11th and personally took command. He reorganized the armies because he wanted to, I think, to assume control. He did not relieve me of command, but I had no command. My command in the Army of the Tennessee was in title only, because he, particularly when John Pope got to Pittsburgh Landing on April the 21st with the Army of the Mississippi, Halleck now had the Army of the Tennessee, the Army of the Ohio, and the Army of the Mississippi, pushing about 75,000 men, and he organized them into 3 grand columns, with my Army of the Tennessee being in the right wing and the reserve. McClernand was put in command of the reserve. Thomas has got command, I believe, of the right wing, and Pope of the left wing, and Halleck taking command of the center wing column. And of course, it's clear to see there's no position for myself. So I was effectively removed from command, and this disturbed me greatly. We rested and refitted, and on April 29th began the move toward Corinth, which is 20 miles away. I think it best describes the movement to Corinth as a moving siege. We got to Corinth on the 29th of May. We left Pittsburgh Landing 20 miles north on the 29th of April. So it took a month to get there. We'd move less than a mile. Halleck would have men entrenched, put up breastworks, and move a few feet, it seems. The next day, move a few feet. So it was agonizingly slow. And I have no duties, so I'm chafing greatly over this reorganization and so forth. So on May the 11th, I felt that there was no pressing issue with the enemy, and I wrote General Halleck a personal letter to ask to be relieved of command. I should like to read that to you. Grant to Halleck, May 11th, 1862. Since the publication of Special Orders Number 35, relieving me from immediate command of any portion of the Army in the field, I have felt my position as anomalous and determined to have it corrected in some way, so soon as the present impending crisis should be brought to a close. I felt that censure was implied, but did not wish to call up the matter in the face of the enemy. Now, however, as I believe it is generally understood through this army that my position differs but little from that of one in arrest, and as this opinion may be much strengthened from the fact that orders to the right wing and the reserves, both nominally under my command, are transmitted direct from headquarters without going through me. I deem it due to myself to ask you the full restoration to duty according to my rank, or to be relieved entirely from further duty. I do not believe that there is any disposition on the part of yourself to do me any injustice, but suspicions have been aroused that you may be acting under instructions from higher authority that I know nothing of, that there has been a studied, persistent opposition to me by persons outside of the Army, and it may be by some in it. I am fully aware. This I care nothing for further than it is calculated to weaken confidence in me with those whom it becomes my duty to command. In conclusion, then, General, I respectfully ask either to be relieved from duty entirely, or to have my position so defined that there can be no mistaking it. I address you direct instead of through the Adjutant General, because this is more a private matter, and one in which I may possibly be wrong, than on official business. General Halleck replied to me the next day and said, "Your position as second in command of the entire forces here in the field rendered it proper that you should be relieved from the direct charge of either the right wing or the reserve, both of which are mainly composed of your forces. Orders for movements in the field will be sent direct from these headquarters to commanders of Army corps, divisions, brigades, or even regiments, if deemed necessary, and you will have no more cause of complaint on that than others have. I am very much surprised, General, that you should find any cause of complaint in the recent assignment of commands. You have precisely the position to which your rank entitles you. Had I given you the right wing or the reserve only, it would have been a reduction rather than an increase of command, and I would not give you both without placing you in the position you now occupy. You certainly will not suspect me of any intentions to injure your feelings or reputation, or to do you any injustice. If so, you will eventually change your mind on this subject. For the last 3 months, I have done everything in my power to ward off the attacks which were made upon you. If you believe me your friend, you will not require explanation. If not, explanation on my part would be of little avail. And that was apparently that end of the matter as far as General Halleck was concerned. A few days afterward, though, Halleck reorganized the Army. Apparently the 3 grand columns was more than even he wanted to contend with, and he restored the separate Army commands, and I had my Army back, but I was still nominally in command. At that point, I had resolved to go home for some leave. I'd written Julia a letter that said I might as well be in the farthest reaches of my command to be as good or do as much good as what I am doing now. And I thought, well, I'll go back to St. Louis for a while. Sherman was talking to General Halleck and on one occasion in his tent, and Halleck said, "Grant's leaving, going where?" Back to St. Louis for some leave. Sherman thought that I was going to resign from the Army, and he immediately came to talk to me, demanded what I was doing, and I said, "I'm packing to leave." And he said, "Where are you going?" "St. Louis." "Why?" "I just need to be away for a while." And then he said, "Don't resign. You'll regret it, and you'll be doing actually what Halleck wants you to do. So don't resign. What you should do, perhaps, is ask for a change of headquarters location." And that seemed a good idea to me. I didn't tell Sherman I wasn't going to resign. I just let that go. My silence he took for agreement that I was. But I considered his suggestion, and I asked General Halleck for a change of command, and I moved my headquarters to Memphis, Tennessee on July 22nd, arriving there on the 23rd. But the movement on Corinth was glacial. As we got closer, particularly after the 26th, I believe it was the 26th that Beauregard put out the orders that they were going to evacuate. But my pioneers had come to me, a lot of them former railroad men, and said, "General, those Rebs are not coming into Corinth, they're leaving, because we're listening to the rails, and we can tell that empty trains or loaded trains are leaving Corinth and empty ones coming back." But Beauregard was pretty clever. He was having bands play and crowds and soldiers cheer whenever a train came back in, an empty one, and not so much when they left. So Beauregard was actually evacuating Corinth. And this is after May the 26th. We're getting closer, and the next day or so, I sensed on a ride inspection that Sherman on the far right, the enemy's left, the enemy was weak. And I went back immediately to Halleck and suggested, why don't we quickly attack from Sherman's position? We'll roll up the Reb line and push them back into Corinth and defeat them in detail. General Halleck said, "When I want your opinion, General Grant, I'll ask for it. And until then, I'll thank you to keep your opinions to yourself." And he said this in front of a group of officers. I thought I had perhaps said something unmilitary, but I said nothing else after that. On the 29th of May and the 30th, John Pope, the 29th, Halleck said, "The greatest of all battles is going to be fought tomorrow." He even telegraphed something to that nature, I understand, to President Lincoln. John Pope goes into Corinth, probes into Corinth, and finds it defended by a host of Quaker guns, cannons painted the muzzles are painted black to look like cannon, and straw men with even smiling faces painted on the faces, and no Beauregard. He had completely gotten away. I felt vindicated about my suggestion to hit them early and hard on their left. In fact, rode out to that location and saw for myself that what I had predicted would have happened had we hit them. So we then went into garrison in Corinth. Yes, we had the crossroads, and that was a tremendous victory, but there was no value in Corinth beyond that. So then I moved my headquarters, as I said, on June 22nd to Memphis, and on July the 15th returned to Corinth, being summoned there abruptly, and on July 17th General Halleck left for Washington City, and I again had command of my army in actuality, and I was back in Corinth with the army. And before I left Memphis, I sent Lew Wallace back to Indiana to do recruiting duties. So Lew Wallace is no longer with us. When I was in Corinth, I set up my headquarters in the home of one Francis Whitfield, and a very nice home. Mr. Whitfield swore and declared to me and my staff that he said I'm an original Union man, and I thought that was wonderful of Mr. Whitfield. But I also knew at the time he had been an original supplier, contractor to the Confederacy. So I was enjoying the amenities of his home there in Corinth, and he was enjoying the amenities of the federal prison in Alton, Illinois. Uh, to look back at the Battle of Shiloh, I would like to say a few things to summarize it. Shiloh is the most misunderstood, or perhaps it's more accurate to say the most persistently misunderstood battle between the Federals and the Confederates in this war so far. It was a tremendous slaughter for both sides in terms of casualties. It was the largest battle fought to this date, the date of April 6th and 7th, on the North American continent. 100,000 men actually or more involved over 30 square miles of territory. It was a collision of 178 guns were at Shiloh. Jackson, Tennessee is 50 miles away as the crow flies, and people in Jackson, Tennessee wrote in letters and diaries that they could clearly hear the Battle of Shiloh 50 miles away. So you can understand I easily heard it just 8 miles away. The battle was really two separate battles. The first day, when the Confederates rolled us up all the way back to the river, and Colonel Webster set up our last line of defense. He had 52 guns in that last line of defense, running from the river to the west in a line, and fired on the rebels at the end of the day, and they were persuaded not to attack us again because of such a heavy fire coming from 52 guns. The second day, and the rebels impressed me with the ferocity of their attacks with no apparent concern for their own well-being. The second day was a different battle in that it was reversed, and we pushed them back and retook everything that we had lost the day before. So at the end of that battle, the second day, everything as far as territory was as it had been before the battle, except that there was terrible loss of life. There was a field there in that battle I noticed on the second day that was carpeted with the bodies of men. It would have been possible to walk diagonally from any direction you wished, all the way across that field, with your feet never touching the ground, stepping only on the dead bodies of men. I'd never seen anything like that. I was convinced, though, after the battle, that it was going to be a long and bloody war. But I was also convinced that we would prevail. Convinced it would be long because of what I had seen for 2 days from the Confederate soldier and their leadership. And convinced as well because even though we had won the Battle of Fort Donelson and taken Bowling Green and Western Kentucky, all of Middle and West Tennessee, and pushed them back as far south as a line east and west from Corinth, Mississippi, and had taken an entire army out of the field, they still, within weeks, mounted a ferocious attack on us, leaving heavy entrenchments to come out and give us battle. So the thinking that they're one big fight and they're going to give it up was beginning to fade quickly. And they were nonplussed by these losses. They were determined to come back and win this war, despite losses, despite losing the territory, losing the capital city of Nashville, Tennessee, losing the supply lines. None of that apparently mattered to them at all. They were going to come and hit us. I was convinced that it would be that we would prevail in the war because at Shiloh, they hit us with the best that they had. If you look at the Confederate leadership there at Shiloh, it reads like a who's who in military stardom. From Albert Sidney Johnston all the way through Braxton Bragg and General Hardee. Breckinridge was their former vice president of the United States. All good men and leaders. So they hit us with the best that they had. They hit us with the most that they could get. They had, I understand now, that about 44,000. And this was I remind you, just within weeks of losing Donelson on February the 16th. On April the 6th, they hit us with 44,000 men. So they quickly amassed a substantial army. And the third reason that I felt it was going to be a long war was because they hit us as hard as they could for 2 days, and we still prevailed. And at Shiloh, their objectives were twofold: to destroy a federal army, which they did not, and to take a significant position from us at Pittsburgh Landing, which they did not. So I am convinced at this stage in the war that we will prevail, but I'm also becoming more profoundly convinced that it's not going to be a one more fight and everyone will go home. Those hopes are fading. Shiloh casualties had more casualties in 36 hours there than we've had in all three of the wars that we had been in: the Revolution, the War of 1812, and the Mexican War. And it happened in such a short period of time, and nothing like that's ever happened before. It brought the country to its knees. General Buell has been contending that he saved the Army of the Tennessee. I dispute that. General Donelson got 3 regiments across the river on the evening of the first day: the 36th Indiana, the 6th Ohio, and the 24th Ohio, and they had 2 casualties, 2 killed and 1 wounded. We had 7,000 in the Army of the Tennessee killed and wounded. So I think those numbers, 3 for them, 7,000 for the Army of the Ohio, 7,000 for the Army of the Tennessee. I think those numbers speak for themselves. General Buell had a great deal of difficulty accepting the men who had fled the combat and were hiding under the riverbank there at the landing. And what I saw him hitting them with the flat of his sword, threatening to shoot them where they lay if they didn't get back into combat. And I was disgusted with that, because I knew that they were just scared, that they'd come back and be good soldiers. But General Buell doesn't seem to distinguish between the volunteer who was there to fight for a principle from the heart, as opposed to the man who was in the Army because he didn't want to do anything else. Many of the regular soldiers were such men. And the volunteer soldier often had some substantial means and often had a good education. So we were seeing here for the first time in a long time, since perhaps the Mexican War, that men are fighting for principle. We've got a lot of volunteers, and they fight well. I saw that in the Mexican War, and I was happy to take a volunteer regiment when I was given a colonelcy. Volunteers fight well, for they are inspired. So Shiloh was a cataclysmic occurrence that wrought changes throughout the Army and throughout the country, because people are beginning to accept it's going to be a war for a long time. And what have we done? What what have we done? And it's too late to undo it. So to bring it to a close, our recollections and reflections tonight, the Battle of Shiloh was a wake-up signal to the country. I think that when the Confederates left that field, they weren't so despising of the Yankee as an enemy. And I will tell you that the Federal soldier had a healthy respect for the Confederate soldier after Shiloh. The first day was a debacle for Federals, and the second day was a debacle for the Confederates. Essentially, two different battles in one. More casualties in those 2 days than can be imagined, more than in all the wars we fought before. Shiloh it is already being said that after Shiloh, nobody in the South is smiling. And I would endorse that thought and say that I don't think many people in the North are smiling either. I know that there was a clamor for me to be sacked and removed from command, and the president sent General Halleck to take personal field command, and I was placed in a limbo of no command, even though I still held my title. And for the next 3 months, all of April, all of May, all the way through the 22nd of June, and then into July the 15th, I was in a situation with command that I didn't have a command, and wondering, why is this being done? Who is doing this, and why are they doing it to me? And I haven't found out. I don't think it's Halleck. I don't think it's McClellan, but I would like to know who is causing a problem for me above me. But at this date here, on July the 17th, I am back in Corinth, Mississippi. I am back in command of my army. Now, I have suggested that we could march. We've got 80,000 men here in Corinth. We could march to Vicksburg and take Vicksburg. They can't get enough soldiers in front of us to stop us now. We could go to Mobile, Alabama, and take Mobile Bay and that supply center. We could indeed march directly to Chattanooga and take Chattanooga. Now, Buell has been ordered to go to Chattanooga, but he's also been ordered to repair the Memphis and Charleston Railroad and all of the bridges as he goes. Well, that is really slowing him down, because it takes time to lay track and replace track. Moreover, as soon as he's out of sight, guerrillas come in and destroy the track that he's just laid down. So that's an exercise in futility. Perhaps he should better march directly to Chattanooga. We could have gone on, we could have taken Corinth within 2 days after Pope got there back on April 21st. But yet we moved like a glacier for a month to get to Corinth. And Khomeini, I believe, the great writer Khomeini, military authority, said something that I think about frequently. Time not well used allows the enemy to accrue benefits that he did not earn. So in all of those weeks between Donelson and Shiloh, the enemy was allowed to regroup and gather in Corinth, Mississippi. And in those 2 months, from April the 7th, the second day of the battle, to April 29th, before we even moved, and from April 29th to May 29th, that's 7 weeks that we didn't take advantage of the victory at Shiloh. So all of the benefits that we accrued from the benefit of Shiloh both militarily and morally over the South, we lost. It evaporated through slow movement. And the South was able to accrue benefits because Beauregard was able to get his troops out of Corinth before we went into, even attempted to go into Corinth. So there are many things to think about in relationship to the Battle of Shiloh and what happened after it. There are questions that I have about the Battle of Shiloh from Fort Donelson to my being here in July, because I've been essentially removed from command, placed back in command, essentially removed from command again. Now I'm back in command, so it's been an up and down journey for me. And the differences in the attitude of the soldiers, and I think in the country after the Battle of Shiloh, are substantial. So I think I have said quite enough for this visit and these recollections. And I must once again be out and about and see to my command and be about my business. So until we come together again, I'm Major General Ulysses S. Grant bidding you adieu.